John, first
Hi,
of all,
Vid.
thank you for joining us.
Very welcome. Good to see you again,
Good to see you as well.
albeit strange and extraordinary, alarming circumstances, but we
Indeed.
soldier on.
To start off with a short question, where do you see the main advantages of Irish whistleblowing protection system, and why do you think, or if you actually think, that the protection of whistleblowers in Ireland is efficient?
I mean, Ireland's introduced the Protected Disclosures Act in 2014 on the back of a number of scandals, not least one surrounding the collapse of our banking system in 2007, 2008.
I was the risk manager for Unicredito Italiano Dublin's operation in 2007. Unicredit is the biggest bank in Italy. It owns Bank Austria Kreditanstalt. It also owns Bayerische Hupo and Vereinsbank HVB. We are talking about a very large bank. My crime, my only crime, was to comply with Irish law. I walked broad daylight, walked down to the regulator's office, the Central Bank of Ireland, and said, I am breaking the law. I am signing for billions that do not exist. The chairman of my bank in Ireland, after this happened, after I reported a breach of billions, was appointed as a director to the Central Bank of Ireland. There is no point in making more laws if the ones that exist are not enforced. Thank you.
Prior to 2014, we had around, I think, 15 or 16 pieces of legislation on the statute books covering protections for everyone reporting breaches of telecommunications regulations to health and safety risks. But we didn't have one law that protected everyone across every sector of the economy. And that was addressed in 2014 with the Protected Disclosures Act, or PDA, we sometimes call it, which now applies to all sectors of the economy. And it even extends to members of our defence forces, intelligence services, or well, we don't have an intelligence service as such, but they would be police officers, intelligence, security, members of the security services and police and military. So it creates a great deal more certainty than was the case prior to 2014 for workers who want to speak up. It also, secondly, allows for people to report to journalists, to members of civil society in certain circumstances, and it takes a stepped, we call it a step disclosure regime, but it's not really a step that you have to take, but there are different tiers, you could say, which will encourage people to report internally first to their employer. And if the worker feels that it needs to be addressed by someone else, such as a regulator, they can do so. But there are higher standards or higher tests for them to meet if they want to report outside their organization or to a journalist or a member of civil society organization, and that might include a requirement to show that there was an immediate health risk to the public interest, such as an immediate risk to health and safety of the public, or they believe that the concerns they were raising would be covered up, or they might suffer as a result of speaking up. So we take this graduated approach, or stepped approach to disclosures, which is aimed firstly at encouraging people to report internally and giving employers a chance to address those concerns quickly, but also provides a safety valve for people if they do need to report to a journalist, knowing that they will be afforded some legal protections in doing so. It also provides or allows people the opportunity to use the court system to seek redress for retaliation, for penalisation. So someone can go to the circuit court, one of the lower courts, where it's less expensive to take action if they've been fired, and seek their reinstatement within 21 days of receiving notice of dismissal. And the court can rule that the employer had dismissed them unlawfully, that there was a chance, or there was a likelihood that they were making a protected disclosure, and to have them reinstated pending a hearing before the Labour Courts, before the Workplace Relations Commission. They can also seek compensation for detriment, and there's no cap on compensation there through the High Court, and people can seek compensation through the Workplace Relations Commission, which is part of the Labour Court system. And instead of receiving 2 years compensation for unfair dismissal, receive 5 years compensation. So there are effectively heavier penalties on employers who unfairly dismiss someone making a protected disclosure.
Two-tier approach. So first is just passing the legislation, and then what comes next? Because what we have here in Slovenia, usually we're good at preparing the laws. Where we fail is the implementation. And I think this portrayal of whistleblowers protection as a process, not so much as just transposition of the directive, is extremely important. So if you think that there's anything it might be worth emphasizing from your case as well, this could be beneficial to us.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many resources out there, so much guidance, so much experience to tap into. And all of it is free. You don't need to pay an expensive consultant. Although you might get a good service from a consultant, but you don't need to pay for this information. It's out there. It's on the internet, and there are organizations working on this, like ourselves, with TI, who can provide guidance and support in writing this legislation. I mean, when it comes to passing this legislation, whether it's in Slovenia or any other EU member state, it's important to look at or consider the spirit as well as the letter of in the case of the EU directive, the spirit of that directive as much as the text of the directive itself. It was inspired. It wasn't just a response to scandals such as LuxLeaks and the demand for protection of whistleblowers. It was also inspired by legal developments in France, the Netherlands, and Ireland. And I think the European Commission understood that if it works in those member states, why not in the other? And we do have good legislation on paper, but in practice it doesn't always work out that way. So we found a colleague of ours, Lauren Kearns, who's Dr. Lauren Kearns, who's a specialist in protected disclosures law at Maynooth University, found that I think it was 88% of cases before the Workplace Relations Commission are failing. So this points to a problem, that something is going wrong that needs to be addressed. The law, when it was drafted in 2014, did not reverse, unlike the UK legislation, it didn't reverse the burden of proof on employers to show that they had not penalised a worker for making a protected disclosure. Instead, the onus is on the worker to show they were penalised for having made a protected disclosure. So that already tips the balance in favour of the employer against the employee, when we know that whistleblower legislation is aimed at trying to redress that balance, making sure that both the employer and the employee are working on or playing on a level playing field, that they both have an equal opportunity to make their case before the courts. The other problem that we've encountered in practice is the lack of awareness amongst employers and employees of employees' rights and employers' responsibilities around the law. So we found in a survey of private sector companies in 2016 that only 10% had policies in place around protected disclosures, just over 30% had any procedure in place. And that means that many employees are unaware of their rights and their responsibilities. So we're much more likely to make mistakes when trying to make a protected disclosure. Most don't know of any services that, like our own Speak Up helpline, we offer advice and access to legal advice through our helpline. most people wouldn't be aware of those free resources, so they're much more likely to speak up without having either thought it through or thought through the legal consequences of doing so, or doing it in the wrong way. I mean, you might find someone going on national radio to blow the whistle before talking to their employer, or going on Facebook, and they need to be made aware of the fact that that could be a risky strategy to take. So it's important that people are made aware of those rights and responsibilities. And it's also important that employers take their responsibilities to their workers more seriously too. And that doesn't just mean telling them that they won't be penalized for speaking up. It also means that they will act in response to concerns that are raised. We found, I mean, research in the US, Ireland, Australia finds that either the first or second most common reason people don't speak up is not fear of reprisal, it's fear of futility. It's the fear that nothing will be done, that they'll do all this work to speak up, they'll brace themselves, they'll get legal advice, they might tell their family that they're about to blow the whistle, and then nothing happens. And when the employer might thank them for speaking up, they might give them the policy that shows that if they, it might give them some guidance on showing that if they are trying to assure them that if they do speak up, they won't be penalized. But if nothing is done, the law is one thing, but practice is another. And the law does need to be strengthened, and it will be strengthened with the transposition of the EU directive next year. But people, policymakers, employers, trade unions, civil society organizations need to be aware that there's much more to this than simply passing a law. We need to make sure that that law is working for everyone, and that requires a lot of work and thought in advance of passing the law. The goal here is not to create the lowest, or create the lowest common denominator here for whistleblower protections, to raise the bars, to raise standards. And there are lots of mandatory provisions in the directive, but also voluntary ones, and those are largely based on good practice in the European Union and elsewhere. And it would be important for legislators to understand that they have an opportunity here to set a standard for their counterparts, and to also make sure that this legislation is as strong as it can be, not just to protect employees, but also to protect employers and Slovenian economy, environment, and the general public interest. This legislation, if it's to work properly, needs to be comprehensive, and it needs to be progressive as well. And I don't imagine either that any one member state will get this right come 2021. This is an iterative process. You want to learn from experience and continually improve these protections so that they're both proportionate and effective, and that they speak to the needs of and the rights of both employers and employees. You find that balance, you'll have succeeded in creating legislation that works. At the moment, even in Ireland, we don't have that legislation, effective legislation. On paper, it looks great, but it needs to be tweaked, and we need to be continually improving. There is guidance, we can find a link to it from the ACCA, the Association of Certified and Chartered Accountants, I think, in the UK, which published a guide with Wim van der Kerchove from Greenwich University and Kay Kenny from Galway, produced guidance for employers, which is really is insightful, and it draws from the experience of a number of UK and Irish companies. But amongst its findings is that those procedures that are the most effective are welcoming of disclosures from staff and workers, and make it clear that it doesn't matter whether you're reporting fraud or corruption or what might be considered a minor health and safety risk. Those disclosures are welcome, and there's an awful lot that can be learned from that can be used to build up to help gather intelligence for the organization so it can address these risks in the future, promote good governance and compliance. The other point that I made it already is that organizations need to make their systems responsive and visible. So they need to be well resourced, well organized, and well mandated. So it needs to be clear what role a whistleblower champion in an organization has, or a whistleblower help desk or hotline is going to play. You need to make sure how those systems work together, and communicate that clearly to the worker, to employees. It's also important that they're able to say what will happen after the disclosure is made. It's not enough to say whistleblowers will be protected. You also need to be able to say, well, how are you going to assess a concern? How are we going to investigate it? What will the terms of reference be? Will you have an opportunity to review the terms of reference or appeal them if you have concerns about the process by which the investigation will take place? So there are lots of things that you don't think of immediately when you're considering whistleblower protection, but they all matter when someone speaks up, because blowing the whistle is only the start of the process. Very often this process can last for years, and you need to make sure you have adequate procedures in place to ensure that experience is as smooth for everyone as possible, that it's as clear, responsive, and as well resourced as well as it can be. And then finally, I think important thing, and this is finding the ACCA study, is it's important that employers participate in the development of standards around this. So we're working with the International Standardization or Standards Organization, ISO, around ISO standards on whistleblowing. They're due to be finalized, I think, later this year or early next year. We've been developing standards with employers here in Ireland under the Integrity at Work programme, and I will soon have a website which we'll provide the link to as well. But you can visit our website, integrityatwork.ie, for more information on that. We work with employers in helping them establish standards and procedures so that they can better respond to concerns once they are raised, with the focus being on action, not just on words. So an awful lot to think about, not just legislation in its own right, but also the steps you need to take to implement it, and the steps that need to be taken to act on the concerns raised by disclosures, not just on assuring disclosures or whistleblowers that they're protected once they do speak up.